Today we are going to discuss the concepts of measurement and sampling. And for that purpose, first of all, we are going to discuss some definitions first, and starting from the definition of population. So as a biologist, we are well aware of the concept of population, that what is meant by a population in biology. So in biology, all the individuals of a species that interact with one another to maintain a homogeneous gene pool are known as a population. So this is the concept of population in biology, that all those individuals, or the collection of all those individuals that belong to the same species and that are able to interact with one another to maintain a homogeneous gene pool. So that collection of the individuals belonging to the same species is known as population in biology. While the concept of population in statistics is a bit different. In statistics, the population is defined as any collection of individual items or units which are the subject of investigation. It means that any collection of the items or any collection of the units, whether they're living or non-living, from which we are taking the observations, so that collection is known as a statistical population. So any collection of the items, any collection of the units on which we are working, on which we are doing research, is known as a population. So it doesn't matter if they belong to the same species or no, they are going to be regarded as a single population if they are the subject of our investigation. So we can further differentiate this concept by taking the example of from biodiversity, for example, right? So if we are talking about population of a specific mouse species, or the rat species, for example, the field rat species. So we are talking about the field rat species, and we are talking about their population in a certain area, right? So when we are talking about those rats, we are talking about only those rats in that specific area that belong to a single species, and we are investigating them. For example, we are investigating them for their feeding habits, right? So the population would be all those rats which are present in that area and they belong to the same species. So that will be considered as a population in terms of biology. But in statistics, it doesn't matter if they belong to the same species or belong to the different species. So they may belong to the same species, or they may belong to more than one species. Like taking the same example, that when we are talking about the field rats, so we want to investigate the feeding habits of field rat in a specific area. And we don't want to be specific for their species, rather we want to investigate the feeding habits of all species of the field rats that are present in that area. So in that case, all of those field rats, although they belong to different species, but they will be considered a single population in terms of statistics. In biology, they will be considered different populations, but in statistics, they all will be considered a single population. So in biology, the population means individuals of a species that can interact with one another and that can maintain a homogeneous gene pool, while in statistics, it is any collection of individual items or units, whether living or non-living, whether belonging to the same species or different species, but if we are working on them and they are the subject of our investigation, then their collection is known as the statistical population. Now, the next concept that we want to discuss is the variable, the definition of variable. So what is meant by a variable? So this word variable, it stems from the word variation, right? So it is related to the word variation, and variation means being different. So variable is something which shows differences, which shows variation, that shows differences for a specific trait among different members of the population. So variable is a characteristic of a population which differs from individual to individual, right? So this is a trait of a population, or this is the characteristic of a population which differs from individual to individual. So different individuals in the population, they show a variation in the exhibition of that character, or in possessing that trait. And we can take some examples like the length, age, proximity to a neighbor, mass, temperature, number of parasites. So these are the examples of biological variables. And we can see that length varies from individual to individual in a population. Age also varies from individual to individual in a population. And proximity to a neighbor, that when we are talking about the relative placement of different organisms in the field or in a different in a habitat, then we are talking about their proximity to a neighbor. So obviously some of the individuals, they are closer to a specific neighbor, and some of the individuals, they will be far away from that specific neighbor. So proximity to neighbor, that will also differ from person to person. So you can take that example as your houses in a lane, right? So in a lane, for example, if you're talking about the house number 102 in the lane, right? So house number 103 is closest to house number 102. House number 104 is a little bit further from 102 as compared to 103. The house number 106 is a bit far from the house number 102. So the proximity to a neighbor, that also varies. And mass, of course, mass also varies from individual to individual in a population. The temperature also varies. Our daily temperature varies. Our individual body temperatures, they vary. And then the number of parasites on an individual, they also vary. So these are the examples of the characteristics of a biological population that differ from individual to individual. So same concept applies into the statistical population, that these variables are those characteristics that differ from one unit to the other unit, or that differ from one item to the other item, or from one member to the other member of the statistical population. Now, the next thing is that these are the variables to which numbers or values can be assigned. So the question is that why we are talking about numbers or values. The reason is because, as we discussed in the previous lecture, that statistics deal with the quantifiable information. So statistics deals with that information which can be presented in numbers. So that is why we are talking about only those variables or those characteristics that are variable in the population that can be presented in the form of numbers. They can be the count of things, or they can be the length or measurement of something. So these numbers or values, these numerical variables, they are used for the purpose of quantification, because we are talking about statistics here, right? So this is the concept of variable. That variable is that characteristic in a population that shows variation that differs from individual to individual in a population. Our next concept is the concept of sample, right? So it is rarely possible to obtain measures from all units in a population. For example, if we have a very huge population and we want to take some observation from all members of that population, and again we are taking the example of the university students, for example, that if we want to measure the height of students in a university, and if there are 2,000 students on the campus, then is it possible to take height of each one of those 2,000 students? So that is actually not possible. So what we do is we measure the height from 300 or 400 students, and that group from which the observations are taken, that group will be known as the sample. So investigator has to collect information from a smaller group or subset that can represent the group as a whole. So sample is basically that subgroup from the population which represents the group or population as a whole. So this is the concept of sample. So sample is often known as the subset or the subgroup, right? Now the unit. So what is meant by unit in terms of statistics? Unit is any individual or item from which a record is obtained. And again, if we are talking about the height, then height is our variable, and we are recording the height of students. So individual student will be known as the unit. So unit is that individual or item from which we take one observation. So that record is known as the observation. So record of the variable obtained from each unit in the sample is known as observation, right? Record of the variable obtained from each unit in the sample is known as observation. So these are the definitions of unit and observation. So unit is that individual or that item from which the observation is taken, from which a single observation is taken. And what is observation? Observation is basically the record of the variable that we are working on. Now we are going to see the relationship between these terms that we have just studied, the population samples, observations, units, and variables. And for that purpose, we are going to take the example of a communal roost of starlings. So in the pictures, you can see that there is a small bird, and this bird is a starling. And then you can see a tree on which a large number of birds are present. So this is a communal roost. So what is roost? Roost is the place for rest or sleep, and this is usually associated with birds. And communal roost means the large flocks or colonies roosting together, usually in trees with several hundred on each. So this is meant by roost and communal roost, and we are going to take this example to describe the relationship between these terms that we have just studied. So we are going to start with the observation. So observation is, let's say, 132 millimeters. So what is this? This is the observation of a variable. And what is variable here? The variable is wing length. So this is the wing length, 132 millimeters. It is the wing length from a starling. So sample unit is a starling from a communal roost. So a single starling from a communal roost from which the observation is taken is the sample unit. And then the sample is those starlings in the roost which are captured and measured, because it is not possible to capture all of those starlings present in that communal roost. So therefore only those starlings that can be captured and measured for their wing length, they constitute the sample. And then the statistical population. So statistical population is all starlings in the roost which are available for capture and measurement. So this is the relationship between these terms, the observation, variable, sample unit, sample, and statistical population. Now we can see that here as well in another way. So variable. So what is variable? Variable is the wing length, right, that we were talking about. Then the sample unit is a single starling from a communal roost. So this communal roost and a single starling from this communal roost is a sample unit, right? So the sample is those starlings in the roost which are captured and measured. So only those starlings from this roost which can be captured and which can be measured for their wing length, they will constitute the sample. And what will be the population? Population will be this entire communal roost. So all starlings in this communal roost which are available for capture and measurement. So although we were not able to capture all of those starlings, but still they were available for capture and measurement. So they constitute the statistical population. And a single observation might be the wing length from a single starling. So if we have taken observations from 10 starlings, then we are going to have 10 observations. And these observations will be variable from starling to starling. They could be 132 millimeters, they could be 135 millimeters, they could be 140 millimeters. So each of these birds is going to give us a different observation of the same variable, right? So variable here is the wing length, and the observation is the measurement of wing length from different units, and a single unit is a single starling from this communal roost, and the sample is all those starlings which were actually captured and measured for their wing length from which we took the observations. So they are going to constitute the sample. And what they are representing the entire communal roost, which is our statistical population. So this is the relationship between these terms. So I hope this is going to be clear now, that what is meant by observation, variable, sample unit, sample, and statistical population, and what is their relationship with each other. And now we are going to see the relationship between these terms with reference to the counting of things. So in the previous example, we saw the example of a variable which was measured, the wing length of the starlings that was measured. But sometimes we are working on a variable which is actually the count of things. That is not something which can be measured, but rather that is a count of things. For example, the number of ectoparasites on a single individual, right? So that is the count of things. So often we have to count the number of objects in a group of or collection, and that is going to give us one observation. So for that purpose, the dimensions of collection have to be specified. Like in the previous case, we were defining the sample unit as a single starling from which a single observation is taken. So same is the case here, that the sampling unit is that single unit which is going to give us one observation. But in this case, we have to be specific about the dimension of the sampling units. So all the sampling units, they must have the same dimensions so that there is no element of bias in counting of things. For example, if you're counting the number of trees in an area and the sampling units are different fields. So if you're comparing or if you're taking observations from the fields which are different in their sizes, then obviously you're going to have different number of trees, and that is going to affect your actual data because the dimensions are not specified, the dimensions are not uniform, the dimensions are different. So a sampling unit has to be a collection with specific dimensions, and all the sampling units in the statistical population, they have to have that almost uniform dimensions. And sample is a set of sampling units, and observation is the number of objects in a particular sampling unit. So now we are going to see the relationship between these terms. And for that purpose, we're going to take the example of the quadrat and seashell. So here you can see there are different pictures of the quadrat. So a quadrat is simply a square area, a square shape, and that is used in field research. And in the quadrat, you can use it for counting different things within that dimension. So here are some examples of the quadrats, that square objects that are used for specifying an area from which we are actually counting certain things. And we are taking the example of the number of shells. So observation is, for example, 23. So what is 23 here? 23 is the number of shells from where a square quadrat of stated area from which sand is sieved and shells are counted. So for example, if you are onto a beach and you want to count the number of shells over there, so what you're going to do is that you're going to count them as by dividing the area into different sample units. And for that purpose, you are going to use these square quadrats, and these quadrats are going to be of the same size. So you are now specifying the dimensions of that sample unit. So a sample unit is a square quadrat of stated area, or the selected area from which the sand is sieved and shells are counted. So this is going to be one sample unit. And sample is going to be the number of quadrats which are examined. So the number of quadrats or the number of the sample units, they are collectively going to be called as the sample. And what is going to be the statistical population in that case? The statistical population is going to be the total number of quadrats it is possible to mark out in the whole of the study area, right? So statistical population is actually the total number of quadrats it is possible to mark out in the whole of the study area. So it is not possible for you to mark each and every area of each and every part of the study area and take collections from there, but you are going to put the quadrats on different areas, on different selected areas of your study area. But the statistical population is going to be the total number of quadrats it is possible to mark out in whole of the study area. So we are going to see that example through a pictorial description. And here is the pictorial description, and this is the area, or this is the beach that we were talking about, from which we want to count the number of shells from different areas of this beach. So variable is the number of shells in different parts of the beach, and the sample unit is a square quadrat of stated area from which sand is sieved and shells are counted, right? So this is going to be a single sample unit, And this single sample unit is a square quadrat, as you can see here, and this quadrat has a specific dimension, and from this quadrat we are going to collect the sand, we are going to sieve it, and we are going to count the shells present in this quadrat. So the number of shells found in this specific quadrat, they are going to give us one observation, and this one quadrat is going to be called as a sample unit. Then sample is going to be the number of quadrats examined here, and as you can see, how many quadrats do we have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we have 9 quadrats here. So we have 9 sample units, and these 9 sample units, or these 9 quadrats collectively, are called as the sample, right? So sample is the number of the sampling units from which the observations are taken. Now, what is going to be the statistical population in this case? So statistical population is going to be the total number of quadrats it is possible to mark out in whole of the study area. So this is all of our study area, and we can see that these are the number of quadrats that we can mark out in this whole of the study area. So all of this are potentially the all of these are potential sample unit, but only few of them can be marked out. We can mark out the quadrats in only few of these areas, and those quadrats are going to be known as our sample, and each one of these quadrats is individually known as a sample unit. So this is the relationship between these terms. So observation, for example, is 23, as we discussed earlier, that 23 is going to be the number of shells from a single sample unit. So let's say if we have marked out 9 quadrats from this area, and we have taken observations from these quadrats, so these are going to be different. For example, one quadrat gave us the observation of 23 shells in that, the other quadrat gave us the number 25, the other one gave us number 30 or 35 or 34. So these are the number of shells, and you can see that these are variable, and these are variable among different sample units. And what is a sample unit? A sample unit is a single quadrat. And what is sample? Sample is all those sample units, or all those quadrats that we were able to mark out in the area, and from where we were able to count the number of shells. And what is the statistical population? It is the total number of quadrats that we can mark out in this area, and from which we can take the observations. So this is the relationship in terms of counting. So here we have discussed the concepts of population, samples, observations, and variables or units in terms of statistics, that how we are going to use these definitions in this course.